Hi all, once again welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Imani and today we will be solving a coding challenge from Codility, which is the missing integer coding challenge. Okay, so let's start. So I'll be solving this problem in C++. Okay, the problem says write a function in solution that takes in a vector integer a that, given an array A of n integers, returns the smallest positive integer greater than 0 that does not occur in A. For example, have been given array A which has got 1, 3, 6, 4, 1, 2. So these are elements inside an array A. Okay, so the function that we are supposed to write has to return 5 if it has an input array like this. If it has an input array which looks like this, which is 1, 2, 3, the function has to return 4. If we are given an array that is in form of this, the function should return 1. Then the problem asks us to write an efficient algorithm with the following assumption: that n is an integer within the range of 1 to 100,000, and each element of array A is an integer within the range minus 1 million to 1 million. Okay, now this question, let us think of it. What does it want from us? So, if we summarize it in this form by considering what are the inputs, okay, so the input in this question or in this problem is the array. The input is the array A of n integers. Okay, and we are told that the output, okay, output should return smallest positive integers greater than 0 that does not occur in A. So let's think about this term, smallest positive integer greater than 0. So when we think about the smallest positive integer, smallest positive integer greater than 0, smallest positive integer greater than 0, we have got 1. So 1 is after 0 and 1 is the smallest positive integer greater than 0, so we have 1. Now in this case, inside the array, if we don't have 1 in the array A, then we must return 1. Okay, but if it happens that we have 1, then we either return we return, for example, like in our case here, if you look at this array, so for instance, let's consider this array A. Put this down. Let's consider this array A 1, 3, 6, 4, 1, then 2. If you look at this array, we have 1, 3, 6, 4, 1, then 2. We can see that we have 1 already, so we don't have to return 1 because we have 1 already. But what is the smallest positive integer that is missing in this array? Now, if we sort this array from the beginning to the end, so from the smallest to the highest number, we get an array that looks in this form: 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, then 6. Okay, so if we look here, we have 1, we have 1, we have 2, which is exactly after 1, then we have 3, which is exactly after 2, then we have 4, which is exactly after 3, but then we have 6. Now looking at this 6, is that looking at this 6, we are missing 5. So after 4, it should be 5, then 6. Okay, that's why we are told that the function should return 5. Now, how can we go for this? Looking at the difference between 1 and 1 is 0. The difference between 2 and 1 is 1. The difference between 3 and 2 is 1. The difference between 4 and 3 is 1. The difference between 6 and 4 is 2. So meaning that the difference is greater than 1. In this case, we can say that if the difference between the next element and the current element is greater than 1, we then return the sum of current element and 1, meaning that the current element, for example, here will be 4. If we add 1, we will get 5, so we are going to return 5. But if we look at this other example here, okay, if you look at this other example here, element array A has got 1, 2, then 3. We can observe that we have 1 already. The difference between 2 and 1 is 1. The difference between 3 and 2 is also 1, meaning that the difference is not greater than 1. So if we reach at this case, then what we just have to do is we just have to, after making sure that there is no difference greater than 1 detected, we just then return the last element, the sum of the last element of the array and 1. So we add 1 to the last element of the array, which will return 4 in this case here. But if we look at this last example here, we can then say that if you look at this last array, which has got -1 and -3, we can say that if you look at this array, it means that 1 is missing. Okay, so if we remember initially, we had to check if there is 1 in the array. Then if there is no 1, we then return 1. So in this case here, there is no 1 in this array, so we then return 1. Okay, and also we are told that the smallest positive integer greater than 0. So while we are checking for the differences between the current element and the next element to see whether the difference is greater than 1 or not, you have to make sure that these elements as well are greater than 0. So that means we also have to consider that the elements in the array have to be greater than 0. Okay, so let's start solving this question. Now let us have a final sort of steps on how we are going to solve this question. Now, to have an efficient algorithm, we have to consider all possible cases. Now there could be cases where the array is empty. Now if the array is empty, it means that 1 is missing in the array. So we have to say that we have to check for this condition. So if the array is empty, we then return 1. Okay, the other condition is iterating. Sorry, the other step is iterating through the array. If there is 1 in the element, sorry, in the array, if there is 1 in the array, we then flag true. Okay, but if there is no 1 in the array, we then return 1. Okay, that's our next step. But before we do that as well, if you remember, in this array here, we had to sort it out. So we have to sort out the array. Sort the array from the beginning, or from the start to the end, from the start, or from the smallest to the highest integer, from the smallest to the highest integer. So we have to sort that. But in this stage here, in this step here, we will have elements in the array, so the array will not be empty. And now if this case, if we find that there is 1 in the array, we then go and check the last condition. Okay, so we iterate from the first element of the array to the element just before the last element, and we then check the difference between the next element and the current element in the array. We check the differences. Okay, say if their differences, okay, is greater than 1, we then return the sum of current element and 1, so current element plus 1. But if the difference is not greater than 1, we return the last element plus 1. Now when we are checking the difference between the next element and the current element in the array, we have to also make sure that all elements are greater than 0. Okay, alright, so these are the steps that we have to take, and let's go and implement it in our solution. Okay, so we have to, since we're using vector arrays, we have to include vectors. We have to include the vector library. Okay, we will also include in case we want to see the output. Okay, all right, let's start. So if we all remember that we did start with the condition, if the array is empty, we then return 1. And then say if the array is empty, if the array A is empty, we then return 1. Okay, now after this stage, we know that the array is not going to be empty anymore. If this condition is not true, that means the array is not empty anymore. Now we then sort the array from the smallest integer to the highest integer using the sorting function. So the array from the smallest integer, okay, to the highest integer. Okay, and then we iterate through the array to check if there is 1 in the array and flag true if we find 1, but if we don't, then we return 1. Now we can have a boolean variable called flag for one. Okay, flag for one. Okay, initially can give it a value of 0 because initially we don't really know if the array has got 1 until we check it. So we will then go through the array, okay, from the first element, from the first integer of the array to the last element of the array. Now if we go through the first element of the array, we check if we find 1 in the array. So we start from the first element. Is there 1? Yes. Is there 1? Yes. Is there 1? No. We go to the other one. Is there 1? No. Then we return 1. But in this case, if we find 1, then we say that flag for 1 is true. Okay. But if this condition has not been met, meaning that 1 has not been found in the array, we then have to return 1, since 1 is the smallest positive integer greater than 0. Okay, now if it happens that we have found 1 in the array, now we go and check the other missing positive integers in the array. Okay, now in this case we will iterate. If you remember, we will iterate from the first element of the array to the element just before the last element. Check the difference between the next element and the current element in the array. And at the same time, we have to consider that all elements are greater than 0. If the difference is greater than 1, we return the sum of the current element and 1. But if this condition here is not met, then we just return the last element plus 1, meaning that now in this case the element after the last element will be the missing positive integer. Okay, so we have to iterate from the first element of the array to the element just before the last element of the array, because we are going to look for the difference between the next element and the current element. So if we go beyond the last element, we are going to get errors, because there will be there is no number after the last number in the array. So in this case, we will check if first, if you remember, we have to check if all elements, okay, are greater than 0, and that the next element of the array, the difference between the next element of the array and the current element of the array, if it's greater than 1, okay, we then return the current element, okay, plus 1 if this happens. But if this condition is not met, we then return the last element, okay, plus 1, meaning that the next element is going to be the missing positive integer. Now we have to consider as well this condition here, that if there are, but this is the same one as if 1 is not detected, we then return 1. Yes. Okay, so yes, that's all the solution, and let's run the program. Let's run our code. So we got some errors here. Let's see. It says code 1 expected 5, code 1 expected 4. Okay, where did we make a mistake? So now here is where the mistake is. When we say that if we find an element that is equal to, if we find 1 in the array, we flag true. Now if the flag is still, if the flag for 1 is still saying 0, meaning that it's still saying false, meaning that 1 has not been detected, we then return 1. Yes, I think this is the condition where it's missing. Okay, so now let's run the code again. Yes, and we all get correct answer. And yep, let's submit our task. Yes, let's wait. Okay, it's 100%. Yep, and that's all. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.